Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Express. I'm Neena Gopal. This is where we discuss events in our immediate neighborhood, in our backyard that have a direct impact on India. Today, we're looking at the ramifications of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's re-election to a third term in office and what impact it will have on India's foreign policy, its neighborhood first policy, its growing ties with the United States, its unshakable ties with its oldest ally, Russia, and its seeming reluctance to engage with Pakistan and pussyfooting around the very real danger presented by the growing Chinese presence on our northern border that doesn't get the kind of national attention it should. Talking to us today is one of the foremost commentators, writers, and analysts on India's foreign policy, Ambassador KC Singh. He served as India's ambassador to Iran and the United Arab Emirates. He was right in the thick of things as Joint Secretary and spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee undertook his Lahore bus yatra. And before that, worked closely with President Gyani Zail Singh when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister and watched up close how that relationship rapidly unraveled, which he writes about in his fascinating book, The Indian President. Welcome, Ambassador Singh. Also with us is Manoj Kewalramani from the Takshasila Institution. He's Fellow Chinese Studies and heads the Indo-Pacific Studies program at Takshasila. He's also the author of Smokeless War, China's Quest for Geopolitical Dominance, an expert in a country that poses one of the biggest challenges, not just to India, but to the US's global dominance in the coming years. Welcome, Mr. Manoj Kewalramani.
Thank you so much.
Let's start with you, Ambassador KC Singh. So the election results may have cut Prime Minister Narendra Modi's numbers in Parliament pretty drastically, but he still has the required numbers, 290 plus, to bring the NDA and his alliance partners to the table to form the new government. The swearing is now set in for Sunday. So everyone's giving it a whole load of, sort of monikers, the clipped wings, the truncated mandate, Modi clip, Modi muzzled. But I feel it's not going to stop Modi from putting on the kind of grand event, the kind of spectacle that he normally lays out even for his swearing in. And in a grand gesture, he has invited not one, but 7 leaders from the neighborhood. He's invited the president of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who he, I think, upset with unnecessary comments on Kachativu. He's invited Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the Bhutanese Prime Minister Tshering Tobgay, the Prime Minister of Mauritius, Pravind Jugnauth, the Nepalese Prime Minister Kamal Dahal Prachanda, the head of the Seychelles, and Mohammed Muizu, who won his presidency on the plank of an India Out campaign. The only one left out of the South Asia party is Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. Could you explain why that is so, Ambassador? What was it that made Pakistan not even an invite?
Well, I think the Pakistan policy has been, it's a very clear policy of putting it on hold. It's been in deep freeze, especially after the amendment to the Article 370, the constitutional changes done in case of Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan has been very clear that unless you undo that and roll it back, they wouldn't even talk to you. So even if you invited them, they may have just turned down your invite. So there was that question of embarrassment because the Pakistani military or the political system would insist on at least that condition or part of that condition, maybe restoring statehood in case of Jammu and Kashmir. At least that has to be done before they get a face saver and they can talk to you. So it's not a question of only the... Yeah.
Ambassador, there is one point I felt, Nawaz Sharif did make a kind of a gesture last week when he said that the Lahore process was basically, sort of scuppered by the military. In 1998 when we had, the Lahore process underway. And in 2009, he was invited by Modi for the swearing in. Yet he didn't get a call back. And the new finance minister, Ishaq Dar, he's very savvy. He also had pitched for a trade deal this march. He's basically, I mean, the other Pakistani officials whose name I can't remember did say that, the first thing that we should do is establish full diplomatic relations. So do you think that, that with elections being held post the application of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, and the possibility, a very real possibility, that Prime Minister Modi will probably go ahead with assembly polls in the next few months, maybe in September. Will Modi actually move on Pakistan? I mean, would he actually initiate some kind of back channel or reach out or something like that?
Look, what are his priorities at the moment? I think at the moment they're pretending things are normal. They're pretending it's just a normal third term. It's not a normal third term. They need to be constantly on the watch, on the lookout for the two big parties, TDP and the JDU, to remain satisfied. And it's not a question of like in last time or the time before when they had a majority on their own. They had notional allies just to say we have an alliance, but they could throw bits and pieces to the alliance partners, give them one little ministry here, one little ministry there. Now, at the moment, it's going to be very difficult because the two big guys are not only wanting ministries, but if really Chandrababu Naidu, those reports are correct, Chandrababu Naidu wants the speaker's post, as he had got in case of Vajpayee, then it becomes a different game because BJP has got so used to running parliament or not letting parliament run and really applying full pressure on the opposition, banishing them, rushing bills through parliament without proper debate or referring to the committees and so on and so forth. So parliament has been just completely upended. It's been non-functional. But if you get a proper speaker who's reasonably neutral, then, and with a 240 member opposition, it's not going to be easy for Mr. Modi. He doesn't like to be asked questions. He doesn't want to be asked to answer questions. He doesn't like debate in parliament, and he doesn't like JPCs. And that's why Rahul Gandhi has just gone there and said, we need a JPC about the, the manipulation of the stock market, if there's any such thing. So it becomes an entirely different ballgame. So at the moment, his focus will be there. And some of his agenda is out of the window, the common civil law for the whole country, things like one country, one election, things like that, which he would have brought in if he got 300 plus. And ideally, of course, 370 plus.
But to get back to our border issues, basically, I mean, the biggest challenge that we face is not just Pakistan, it's also, I mean, we have multiple challenges on our borders. We have the Bangladeshi Prime Minister Hasina, who has cozied up the Chinese in a very big way. And we have, also, we've seen the same thing happen in the Maldives. And now he's invited the Maldivian President, Mohamed Muzu for the swearing in. Do you think he will face any kind of, pullback or pushback from on his foreign policy initiatives?
Look, this is just for demonstration. All these leaders will come. They came in 2014. Some of them came in 2019. I think we got the ASEAN leaders. There's just drama. There's just theater. Political theater and diplomatic theater will be over in 48 hours. It doesn't change the fundamentals. And the fundamental thing is that the Chinese have managed to upend you in Maldives. And they're well entrenched there. They've thrown your military presence out. And we can say what we want. But there is a distinct tilt towards China. We are not so sure where Nepal is based, how they will behave, etc., because they are also getting pressed. Both Nepal and Bhutan are feeling the Chinese pressure. And Bangladesh, of course, is quite happy to play India against China and get whatever benefits they want, basically a little tilt towards India. But the danger there is that she has so compromised democracy in Bangladesh that tomorrow, for whatever reason, the government changes or she's not there, then you'll face exactly the kind of backlash that you have faced in Maldives. So this is the problem, being too closely aligned with a progressively autocratic leader, because then the retaliation which follows, it affects your diplomacy. It's not a good idea to get placed in that kind of a situation. So I don't think foreign policy is going to be on top of his list of things at the moment. At the moment, he has to stabilize the new arrangement, see how he can work with them. And if you have an independent speaker, you can't start breaking parties, because BJP's instinct is to, grab people, do what they did in Maharashtra, is to basically increase, and so that they are not dependent on anyone else. And then you got Maharashtra elections coming up, and that can also affect the alliance at the center, because you got MPs, just one MP, of course, belonging to Sharad Pawar's nephew's party, but the others have 7 seats or so. So if
Yeah, they do.
Maharashtra government changes, those people may want to go back to Thackeray, because they would be concerned. So, there are domestic elections up front, which can start influencing the alliance system you have at the center. You see, Congress has already got one more, so they have touched 100. There are a number of
That's
other
right.
independents which are floating around. So it's not going to be an easy game. The question is, can he be a Vajpayee? Now, I don't know. We haven't seen any evidence of a temperamental thing there. Mr. Modi's instinct is to be the opposite of Vajpayee, which is to be autocratic, repressive, use force to compel others to do what he wants, rather than create a consensus. Maybe it's an opportunity for him. Yeah.
But we have Master Singh also turned our relationship with Afghanistan around. I mean, as unpopular as it is, the Taliban with their repressive, anti-women kind of policies, we've reached out to them, and we've started. That's quite something on the Modi government's part. I mean, to actually want to, was it a tactical move, because we had no choice but to step in, and sort of, because we've got hundreds and thousands of Afghan students here, and we invested so heavily in Afghanistan, and plus Iran, your old hunting ground. I mean, we've reached out to Iran as well with this Chabahar. This is also quite do you think we'll turn around? Do you think that we'll pursue that kind of a rapprochement with the Taliban?
Well, if they were approaching a rapprochement, wouldn't they be invited for the swearing in? So, it's a relation where you've seen some serious differences between Pakistan and the Taliban, and you think you can probably play on them. So at the moment, you just got your kind of foot in the door. You're far, far away from really normal relations with them. We don't even have Taliban representative in Delhi. I think it's still an open question who really they haven't really sent a proper ambassador. Now, as far as Chabahar is concerned, I think the Iranians will play the Chinese against the Indians. They'll play along with you, but essentially they are in the Chinese and the Russian corner. And more India is seen in the Israeli, American, Saudi, Emirati corner in that game. So the Iranians are quite happy to have the Indians there, because they realize the Chinese have an interest in Gwadar. And therefore, the Chinese would not like Chabahar to get going. So they don't trust them on that. But don't forget, the Chinese have a much, much deeper and wider commercial, economic relationship with Iran. We don't have. We start getting worried about sanctions. And you remember the minute we talked about the Chabahar agreement, the American, the spokesman of the State Department immediately warned us that there are sanctions. You see, it's one thing for us to get an exemption when we said we need to send humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. But now the Russians are coming in, because there is talk of Russians creating a hub in Afghanistan to export oil. And the other thing is, we have again revived the North-South link, for which, of course, Chabahar is not the only link. You can go from their other port. So now, is that link which then ends up in Russia? So if the North-South link you start talking about again, then it's not only sanctions against Iran, there's sanctions against Russia, because you got ongoing war in Ukraine. So it's going to be complicated. I think these are just for display. These are just opening moves. So tactically, we'll kind of keep a door open to both sides. But essentially, India's primary commitment is to the other camp. It's not to this camp, though we like to keep the Russian and the Iranian door open.
That's very interesting. And the point that you made about keeping communication lines open with Russia, I mean, how does that now? Will we continue to do that? Play safe, keep Russia on our side, because China is, of course, a huge influence, as you rightly said, in our neighborhood. both in Pakistan and Gwadar and Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and now Sri Lanka as well, which where the Hambantota port has been taken over, where there are research ships which are hanging around, very close to the Indian coastline. So my question is, what are we going to do about Russia, given the fact that there is such a huge antipathy in Europe towards and the arming of Ukraine is going up steadily, with German missiles being now given to the Ukraine.
You see, neither Russia nor India want this relationship to degrade to an extent that we get too close to the Americans or the Russians get too close to the Chinese. So the Russians also don't want to be seen as the B team of the Chinese in Central Asia or in the rest of the world. So at the moment they have a difficulty, but they don't want to be over dependent on China. For India also, you balance tomorrow you get a Trump there. You don't know what he's going to do in America. The Europeans are concerned. We should be concerned because Trump doesn't think strategically. Trump thinks in terms of transactional deals, trade, on any single issue on which he's agitated, because he's talking of America first. So if India is talking of India first, as Prime Minister Modi often does, then at some stage those two interests clash. It only why India's got a long rope on democratic decline, on various things, on Iran, etc., is because the Democratic Party sees India as a counterweight to China. But that is, yes, Trump would accept that, but Trump's transactional instincts overtake, and America first overtakes any other kind of thinking. So, you have to consider what may happen if Trump comes in. So you have to keep your options open. For instance, now you went very close to the Americans. You invited everybody here on the sidelines of G20 for the India, Middle East, Europe, IMEC. Now what happened? Even that time, you didn't have the Israeli Prime Minister there. So if you have a line which starts at Mr. Adani's port and ends up at Mr. Adani's other port in Israel, in between, you got the Indian Ocean and Arabia. But if the person who is controlling the other port, which is Israel, their prime minister wasn't here, you had the president of UAE, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, it meant something was not right. And this was as yet pre-Gaza. The minute Gaza came in, IMEC is out of the window. So the Iranians have managed, and this was supposed to be really a counterweight to the Iranian influence in the region. So when you play these games with the Americans or play these games with the others, sometimes you don't control it, because how Israel behaves, you don't control. So it goes out of the window. Now you go to the other extent where you say we got the North-South corridor with the Iranians. So it's essentially, we are still not a great power. We are aspirations to be a great power. We don't control many of these events. So we are trying to ride them and see.
That's a very interesting point, actually.
And see the Indian benefit. And that's what every Indian government has done. So that's why even if Mr. Modi was not there, even if Mr. Modi doesn't have a majority, he had a majority, how has he changed it? What is the difference between how his foreign policy and say foreign policy has changed with Narasimha Rao? There is not much difference. All else is a hug. It's the old foreign policy plus a hug. It's more a personalized thing where you make it
that's true.
Mr. Arun Shourie said, what is BJP? It's Congress plus the cow. So the foreign policy now is the old foreign policy plus a hug. So essentially, those are the constraints which continue. Reaching out to the East, ASEAN, reaching out to America. Who began it? Narasimha Rao began it. And then Vajpayee built on it. Then Manmohan Singh built on it. And now you carried it forward. Of course, you brought theatre and diaspora into it, and drama and all that. But then it also has divided the diaspora. So it's upended your relations with Canada. You bring in Khalistan, you bring in other things. So, if you get too much into the politics of the diaspora, it helps you, yes, to some extent. But Vajpayee didn't do it. It was the same diaspora, nor Indira Gandhi do it. So there is a dividing line between people who are citizens of other countries. Yes, they have cultural, historical interest in their land of origin. That has to be sustained. But where do you cross the line? Where do you cross the political divide? For instance, I always say this, now what Prime Minister Modi did in Houston, is bar, and then he kept quiet when they said Trump Sarkar. The crowd said.
Yes.
Now, supposing
Yeah.
the Prime Minister of Nepal came to Delhi and got hold of a big stadium, Nehru Stadium, and collected all the Nepalese here and started, making a political statement, how would you react? I don't think India is going to be terribly happy if they came in here and started giving speeches.
That's true.
It's
But
to be thought about. Yeah.
That's
So
true.
all
But
that.
Biden seems to have overlooked that.
Yeah, he overlooked it, and yet because he's thinking strategically, and yet there are leaders in the world who may not think strategically like Trump. So you have to be very careful. At the same time, you'll also find now free advice coming from Nitish Kumar or from Chandrababu Naidu sometimes.
I was going to say, do you think that kind of thing would happen? I mean, would the allies actually put their, sort of hold Modi back from going full hog, for example, with the Israelis? Because, I mean, Netanyahu's, Badhai comment to Modi was quite unusual. Modi himself has not been as forward and helpful with the Palestinians as he should be, as we had been in the past.
I don't think Nitish Kumar is that much concerned about that, but he's already talking of a dam on the border of Nepal. So he's saying, that is one of the preconditions, that you dam that river. And then normally the Nepalese are very concerned about that because it submerges their arable land. And, a place which is very hilly, arable land is all in the valleys. So if you create a dam, it submerges your arable land. So now he's already made it an issue that because there is flood water coming from there, so we need a dam. That's one of his conditions. Like Bangladesh used to present a condition where, of course, Mamta didn't agree on the Teesta thing. Chandrababu Naidu may have other thoughts on investment, on East Asia, on markets there. And that's where it comes in. For instance, investments going to Gujarat. Is it going to be that easy? Already it's had a reaction in Maharashtra. BJP may not have calculated as yet, but there is an anti-Gujarat feeling on that a lot of investment from which normally would have come, including the International Financial Center, has gone to another state. So when the leaders of those states become powerful, then they start taking exception to this kind of investment or foreign FDI coming in, leaders from abroad, whether they are visiting their states or not. Chandrababu Naidu would like to put Hyderabad up front, not so much Hyderabad as his new capital. And say that, I would like tomorrow American president come, he'll want to take him there and things like that. So now you'll have to, Mr. Modi.
He's got a plan to transform each district in Andhra Pradesh into a particular industrial hub.
You remember when we were in Dubai, Chandrababu Naidu had come there and I took him to meet Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. And of course, that's before their investments went to Hyderabad. And Sheikh Mohammed, the ruler of Dubai, he was already aware of Chandrababu Naidu's reputation as a modernizer, information technology. When we were still not hearing so much of that, it was happening in Bengaluru, but he brought sort of Hyderabad into the mainstream and thinking of Hyderabad as a hub for civil aviation. Now, of course, he's lost control of Hyderabad. You see, Delhi goes a bit too north, but Hyderabad, in terms of the east-west route, it falls on the way. So he would want all that for his new capital, etc. So Mr. Modi will have to now think in terms of much greater attention to these states when you're dealing with the foreign countries, what impact it may have. Just two examples.
That's very interesting. If I can just go to Manoj Kewalramani. I mean, we had a chat just before the show started about Taiwan and China and China's reaction to India's congratulatory message from the new Taiwanese leader. Do you think that is a challenge that Modi will be able to sort of tackle? Because, I mean, he's not the most diplomatic of people, but China, they have refused to even discuss. I mean, even though the fact is that they've got new air bases, they've got, they control much of that, border. Within 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers, they already have, entrenched themselves very deeply unlike the past. How are we going to tackle China, or is it a foreign policy imperative, or is it not?
Look, there is consensus in the country on a stronger position on China. So there he has no problem. And we are quietly building up our infrastructure. We've deployed more people there. And the Chinese also continue to provoke you. Just before the election, they went and renamed all those cities of Arunachal and they published that. So the Chinese also, don't cut a slack as far as the Indian government is concerned. This will go on and you will go on and we will go on dealing with Philippines, whose problem with the Chinese and South China Sea have increased. And Taiwan, of course, I don't think India will intervene if tomorrow there's an attack on Taiwan. But certainly in terms of investment on chips, Apple iPhones and so on and so forth, we are much more commercial and economic investment with Taiwan. It could be more, but India is not showing any reluctance. But you're right, in terms of the Prime Minister of India directly responding. There, of course, the Chinese go ballistic. As you know, when Pelosi, US Speaker of the House of Representatives, went to Taiwan, the Chinese just went ballistic. They had their Navy and Air Force deployed around Taiwan in a kind of a mock attack for almost a week or 10 days after that.
Yeah.
So the Chinese take note of this. Now, at a head of state level, head of government level, if a message comes and we respond to it, you'll see some Chinese reaction. They'll come, but India is willing to put up with it because the Chinese are not going to change how they behave, nor hand back the areas they've occupied in Ladakh, nor stop their competition. But I think what you have to do is, we've not really constrained Chinese exports to India. And that's a question the government has to answer. Somebody has to start taking that. You have to press them where otherwise you've created this dependence on China of cheaper products coming in. But unless you tighten the market, their market access, what is the lever you have against China?
Yeah, Manoj Kewalramani, if I can just bring you in on China, since you are in-house China expert, please tell us what you believe that the biggest challenge is going to be for India's foreign policy. Will it be China?
Yeah, I think that China remains probably the biggest challenge in terms of the world that we are seeing, because much of the transformation that's taking place, a big part of it is the rise of China. I think that I agree with Ambassador saying that, this response by the Chinese to the Taiwanese president's message to Modi and Modi's reaction, I don't think that it was as aggressive as it could have been. And if you just draw a comparison to, Blinken's congratulatory message to Lai and subsequent response by the Chinese foreign ministry, you see a far more aggressive, far more angry response as compared to where the response was in this case. I think that with regard to India's sort of one China policy, you've seen that in our public statements, from the way I understand it, since 2009, 2010, we have not mentioned anything to the effect that we adhere to a one China policy. And I think the Chinese have understood that that's not going to happen unless there is specific concessions that are made to India also. On the boundary, I think that we're likely to see sustained pressure from the Chinese. I think they see it as a strategic tool for more ends than one, in terms of where India directs its resources, in terms of who India partners with internationally, and also in terms of where India's priorities lie, which is to constrain India in the subcontinent. So to that extent, I think the boundary issue is likely to remain alive in one way or the other. The change that has happened in the last 4 years since incursions in Ladakh, attempt at normalization with the Japanese, with the Australians. There's been an effort to reach out to the Europeans. There's been really no effort to reach out to India. And even though the Philippines, in Philippines, there's been a flip in government, and when the government flipped, there was a dialogue, and that dialogue did not go well. And therefore, you've seen intensified pressure. And the Philippines has also been, from a Chinese perspective, far more provocative. India has not really been provocative.
No, you don't think so? Not the fact that we're deployed so heavily in the Gulf waters, in the Indian Ocean, and the Malacca Straits, and that fact that we've sold the DRDO missiles to Vietnam and the Philippines.
I don't think there is a comparative. You can compare what the Chinese view as a provocation with the Philippines vis-a-vis provocations that they assume from India. India has not been provocative. For example, we talked about the Taiwan issue. India is the outlier in the Quad. It is because of India's reticence that you don't see the Quad statements talk about Taiwan. India has not taken any direct position on the Taiwan issue, The only recent statement that you can think of is when the Nancy Pelosi visit happened, and India issued a statement calling for restraint and respect for peace and stability. India has not issued a single statement on Xinjiang, on the issues of Hong Kong. So we've remained fairly measured in how.
Why is that? Why is that? Why are we measured?
I
And do you
think
think
that's
Modi will continue with that? Doesn't he that like bluster and braggadocio and being the chapandi chati kind of
we have not
you
seen
know?
that we have not seen with regard to that with regard to
Why?
China
Because
in terms of how the Indian government operates.
yeah, because we've used Pakistan. Modi has used Pakistan to great effect in 2019 and time and again during this election campaign. But China hasn't figured it all. So why are we talking Chinese incursions?
So there have been partly because it seems it reflects badly on the government. There were incursions, but I think that there have been elements at which that has been used. For example, when after Galwan, when the apps were banned, subsequent restrictions on Chinese investments and scrutiny of Chinese investments. So you've seen some of that being done, but that's essentially an effort to try and move the competition and the confrontation away from the boundary to other domains, economic domains particularly. And I think that's what the government has done largely. So my broad view is that we are likely to continue to see a very strained relationship with China. I don't see any incentive from Beijing's side to try and reach out and mend ties to whatever extent, unless, of course, you see India agreeing to the terms and conditions that Beijing is setting, which I'm thankfully that's not really happened. Yes, we have buffer zones in Ladakh right now, which I don't think are ideal, and I don't think India should accept anything short of a status quo ante vis-a-vis April 2020. So I think that you're likely to see a much more strained relationship going forward. And that's structural. It's not going to change. The neighborhood is part of that, and competition in the neighborhood is part of that. Today, you see India and China. I mean, the structural change of China's engagement in India's neighborhood is the fact that in the past, China's engagement was limited and increasingly it was economic. Today, it is deeply embedded in the polities of our neighbors. So you're seeing political contestation where when governments flip, the relationships also tend to go adverse or improve, right? And that's not an ideal situation, but that's the fact of life that we are going to have to live with.
So you're basically saying that Modi will continue doing exactly what he did the last time. This is not bring up China, not make a noise about China while quietly reaching out to
My I think that a lot of raising of foreign policy issues by the top leadership of the BJP has predominantly been with the attention of what is the impact of that on domestic politics. And I just don't think that China has the same level of emotional reaction for domestic politics that Pakistan has, and therefore you're unlikely to
That's
see that being
interesting.
raked up.
Yeah, that's very interesting. If I can just come back to you, Master Singh, and focus on a little bit on Canada. I mean, here during in the polls, in the Punjab polls, you had an avowed Khalistani win an election, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi's assassin Beant Singh's son win. And Canada's Justin Trudeau has given a very not an enthusiastic response to Modi's re-election. He basically said ties are linked to the rule of law. What do you think we should, how do we handle these accusations about Niger's killing, the involvement of the attempted assassination of Panoon and so on and so forth, and the man who's being held in a Czech jail because of these accusations?
Look, there are two different things. What's happening?
Yeah.
What's happening in Punjab is it's still Punjab is looking for leadership. There's no leadership. Akali Dal has collapsed. BJP is trying to create differences there, put up candidates all over, poached candidates, top leadership of Congress, other people. So it's a vacuum, and you've got farmers' agitation on. Farmers are still sitting there. And we've seen a consequence of that yesterday with Kangana Ranaut claiming that she has been slapped by someone. And today, Taket, the farm leader from Western UP, he has said, we stand with that girl who slapped her. So he's bringing it back. It's not a Hindu-Sikh issue. It's a farmer, non-farmer issue. And she was agitated because Kangana Ranaut speaks in a very crude form when she starts talking about farmers protesting, and she doesn't have the facts, and she says whatever she feels like saying. So what the farmers are saying is that she can't be irrational just because she is a member of parliament. And this has happened to her before. They stopped her car. When the original agitation was going on, when she was driving down, they stopped her car, the farmers, The women surrounded her car and made her apologize for some remarks she
Wow.
had made then. So
My
this
God.
is this. So this has come back. Now, essentially, what's happening in Punjab is different. It's a protest vote. You locked up someone, and so they are protesting against that. And the second one again from nowhere is coming. There's no leadership. There's no party. There's no regional party. Outside the Hindi belt, if you notice, I spoke to a regional YouTube channel, and it's had 1,15,000 views on this.
My
And I said
God.
this, Punjab still needs a regional party. Akali Dal has ceased to be a regional party. And outside the Hindi belt, why are the regional parties successful? Because outside the Hindi belt, each
Because they
state
have
wants
a
to
connect.
have someone who presents their point of view, or represents their culture, their history. And that's not happening in Punjab. So Punjab, there is vacuum. First, they voted irrationally for the Aam Aadmi Party. Have you ever heard of this? That 92 MLAs win in a house of 117. That was also a protest vote. This is also a protest vote. I think we should just ignore it. It doesn't mean that Punjab has gone to the Khalistanis. It's a protest vote. Now, as far as Canada is concerned, what we have to examine is, why does India deal with America differently? Americans have actually got evidence. They've got somebody, they've got pictures, and the person is under arrest in Czech Republic. And his extradition to America is almost complete. So Americans have got that, and apparently more recordings linking Indian officials to what they were trying to do in America. So when it came to Canada, I have a suspicion the Canadians originally got the information only from the Americans, because the Americans were, and that's why they couldn't give the details, because it had yet to be presented to a court. So the Americans forewarned them, because amongst the things they picked up was that these people have a long list, and they've got other targets in America and Canada and other places. So the Americans warned the Canadians. So Canadians shot off their mouth. The Prime Minister shouldn't have done it on the floor of the House without anything concrete in his hands. And that kind of got India going. That got India highly agitated.
You don't have the details. Yes.
Yeah. No, therefore, with Canada, you behave differently. With Americans, you behave differently. Just as with Pakistan, you behave differently. And with China, you behave differently. You see, you don't want to discuss China because the Chinese are the aggressors. They already occupied the land. With Pakistan, you can afford to make it a target and go after them. That's all right for domestic politics. It's a political thing, and I think India is hoping. And there is Trudeau's mistake also. The other thing is, when you polarize the diaspora, the Sikhs are almost 30% of the diaspora's population in Canada. They're not 2%. You see, in India, they may be 2% or less than 2%. But in these countries, they have a very large percentage of the total population. If you combine the Muslim and the Christian, they're probably as many as the Hindus. So it's a different game there in these countries. If you polarize it, it becomes more difficult to handle, because they have, in a place like Canada, they're concentrated in Vancouver, British Columbia, they get political clout. So they're getting elected. They can influence the political game, not in America so much as yet, but certainly in Canada, with 700,000 Sikhs, you can influence the politics of Canada. And I think that is something which we have to understand. But it was suiting domestic politics in India to play it another way. So you're looking for a target to polarize, and you thought that this Khalistan thing will polarize you the votes in Punjab. It hasn't worked. BJP haven't won a single seat. But unfortunately, when you start playing this politics, Congress tried it in the 80s, and we know the consequences. India's probably wait, and the mistake that Trudeau's made is that when you go to a diaspora meeting and their slogans, okay, freedom of speech is fine, but when they're raising pro-Khalistan slogans, the Prime Minister of the country shouldn't be there. It's all right, if freedom of speech, he's standing on a street corner, he can keep doing it. But when he's doing it where the Prime Minister of a country is come, I think they have to tell them in advance that they shall not do that. They can do it before he arrives and they can do it after he leaves. But they can't be doing it while the head of government is there. And I think Trudeau's standing like a Dumbo there. I mean, that's just not done. So then obviously it's going to affect your relations with India, because it looks like there is official approval and that encourages them further. So you have to draw a line and say, you will not, freedom of speech is fine, but you shall not conduct your politics or your freedom of speech in a manner that affects your relationship with India. And I think that is something that Trudeau has not been mindful of. So India is hoping that he'll probably lose the next election and we get somebody else, and therefore. But with America, it's a serious game. The Americans haven't gone the whole hog. They got more information, and the trial will come up in America, and they'll keep this pressure on India. This pressure will be on, and we may see the consequences when Mr. Modi reconstitutes his own office his aides, and so on and so forth. We'll know if some of those people whose name may be figuring, who have traditionally dealt with operations abroad and things like that, whether they are still there or they are not there.
That's a very good point because, yeah, who knows whether we'll have the same national security advisor, the same foreign minister, whether that will continue in this Modi 3.0. If I can just also go to Europe, right? Both your comments, concluding remarks. I just felt that Vladimir Zelensky's comment to Prime Minister Modi, asking him to come to this peace sort of meeting where they would like try and see whether they could resolve the Ukraine-Russia dilemma. I don't think it's possible. But do you really see India having a role to play at all, given its relationship with Vladimir Putin?
I think minimal, because when it comes to Putin, doesn't interfere in your relations with Pakistan or how you deal with your neighbors. So if you go to something which is very critical to Putin and to his rule and control in Russia, I don't think he'll take, we have any leverage there to go and tell him what to do. No, because he doesn't tell us what to do when we are dealing with our neighbors or problems which impinge on national security.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. And this is something, again, it's playing into the American presidential election. I don't think anything is going to happen till then, till the November election. And after that, you may get a president in America who is less sympathetic to Ukraine than Biden. So if that happens, we don't know where that is going. And that is probably what Putin is waiting for. I don't think Putin will settle unless Putin gets his pound of flesh now, which means that the Ukrainians throw up their hands and say, okay, you can keep what you occupy and let's stop it at that. But who will guarantee it? Because tomorrow the Russians can regroup. And then, 2 years from now, that's what they did with Crimea first. And then they waited a few years and then they started on Ukraine. And that's what happens when the global order disintegrates. UN is not able to play that role. So that used to be played by America and by NATO and the alliance partners of America. But if they throw in the towel, then really it's free for all.
That's very interesting. Can I bring in Manoj Kewalramani?
Yeah.
And Manoj, what are your remarks?
I
only got
agree.
5 minutes left.
I agree.
I
think getting involved in that peace conference is a lose-lose scenario for India. I mean, there's a reason why even the Chinese don't want to be part of that conference. You don't have sufficient leverage on Putin to bring him to the table. And being there, India's argument would be around, look, you need a new security architecture in Europe and you need to look at what all sides are doing, which I don't think will be something that the Europeans want to hear. So you're basically putting yourself in a situation where you're bound to end up annoying everybody on the table without actually achieving anything for yourself. Does the conflict benefit India in any way? No, of course not. Forget what it does to the global order, but also the downstream effects which are felt more immediately, or from food to energy to all of that, to financial issues. None of it benefits India. But there's very little that we have that we can do at this stage to try and bring both sides together. And like Ambassador Singh said, I agree that until the US presidential election takes place, and even after that, I think India's leverage is quite limited. It's best to sort of encourage while keeping your hands away from sort of brokering any sorts of peace deal directly.
That's good. So, in conclusion, can we say it is Badai Ho Modi, or is it not? Can I have a comment from both of you?
Well, any prime minister who wins, who comes in, we congratulate him. And the hope is that we might see some remnants of Vajpayee in his character, which have been missing till now, which that may be the positive outcome. He's actually, I was just thinking today, I've been critical of him, but a Modi who is subdued and is made to operate through a consensus may actually be a better prime minister than a combination of people led by someone who doesn't have a vision, who doesn't know what to do, and then that order collapses after a year and a half. So I think a humbled, controlled Modi, functioning more like Vajpayee and less like Putin, is what would be good for India and what we look forward to.
No, that's very well put.
I mean, my view would be is that however he manages his domestic politics, the world outside is not going to be doing any favors. It's a volatile world. It's likely to get much more volatile come November, December. Things are not going to be easy in any which way. So this idea of keeping our options open, it's good, it's useful, but I don't know how far that is going to be feasible as things are evolving. So it's much more difficult when you're now having to bat on two fronts, the domestic front and the international front. But yes, as Ambassador KC Singh says, if he is able to keep this coalition together, to keep the parties that are with him happy, and sustain the momentum that we had in our foreign policy, which is built over the last 25, 30 years, as Ambassador Singh pointed out, then perhaps that's good for us.
That's beautifully put. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming into this program.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, viewers. Thank you. Please click on the New Indian Express website and Global Express and share this view on social media. Thanks again.